All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready for another deep time?
Definitely. Always ready to explore something new.
So, have you ever thought about like a career in DevOps?
Yeah, it's a pretty hot field right now. Lots of opportunity.
Tons. I mean, and it's way more than, just like fixing servers or something, right? It's a whole way of thinking about software.
Absolutely. And we actually have a great podcast episode, Tech Pathways, a DevOps career guide to kind of dig into today.
Yeah, this episode is going to be awesome for anyone who wants to understand, what DevOps really is, what skills you need, and like the real challenges you might face.
We even get some advice from someone who's actually doing the job day in and day out.
Yeah, so by the end, you'll know not just the basics, but, is this the right path for you?
And if it is, you'll get some actionable steps to get started.
Okay, let's jump in. So first things first, what exactly is DevOps? It's more than just a buzzword, right?
Yeah, it gets thrown around a lot, but the core idea is really about bridging the gap between software development, the dev, and IT operations, the ops.
Right. Break down those walls.
Exactly. And it's all about, getting software released faster, smoother, and with higher quality. It's not just about speed, though. It's about, better software, too.
Makes sense. So how does that actually, play out in the real world?
Well, think about it like this. Remember the old days when developers would just, chuck code over the wall to the operations team? And then what happened?
Oh, chaos. Total chaos.
Pretty much. Finger pointing, delays, you name it. DevOps, it's all about breaking down those silos, fostering collaboration, and ultimately delivering value to users more efficiently.
And this podcast, they gave a really good example of a company that was struggling with, constant delays because the dev and ops teams were basically speaking different languages.
Totally. They weren't on the same page at all. Once they adopted a real DevOps mindset, boom, massive increase in both their speed and quality.
Awesome. Okay, so that's the big picture, but let's get down to brass tacks. What skills do you actually need to make it in DevOps? I know this podcast breaks it down into technical and soft skills, right?
Yeah. And, the technical side is definitely important. You got to have some coding chops, right?
Right, got to speak the language.
Exactly. Think Python, for automation or knowing your way around cloud platforms like AWS, that kind of geeky goodness.
I mean, I can rattle off a bunch more. Docker, Kubernetes, Ansible, Jenkins, the list goes on, right?
Yeah, but don't worry if those sound totally alien right now.
We'll circle back to some resources for learning all that stuff later.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing I really appreciated about the podcast was how much they stressed the importance of soft skills, too.
I mean, you can't just be a code monkey, right? You got to be able to work with people.
Exactly. You got to be a strong communicator, a creative problem solver, and adaptable to this, constantly changing tech landscape. Those are your superpowers in DevOps.
So it's like being, a tech wizard and a diplomat.
Exactly. You're not just, coding in a dark room. You're out there leading the charge, building bridges, and making sure everyone's on the same page.
I love that. But okay, let's get real. Even with all the right skills, there are going to be challenges, right? I mean, this field moves so fast. Keeping up with all the tech, that's got to be a challenge on its own.
It definitely is that adaptability muscle. Got to keep it toned. But the podcast also dives into the human side of things, which can be even trickier.
Oh, yeah.
Companies can be resistant to change, even when it means better software, happier customers, and, a smoother workflow for everyone.
Ugh, I can totally see that. So how do you actually break through that resistance? I mean, you've got all these great ideas, but
Right. Well, the podcast guest, who's a super experienced DevOps engineer, had some really insightful thoughts on this. It's about being able to advocate for change, but in a way that resonates with, the decision makers. You got to speak their language.
so it's like understanding the business side of things too, not just the tech.
Exactly. It's about connecting the dots between DevOps practices and, the bottom line. The guest also talked about starting small, proving the value through quick wins, and then gradually expanding the scope of your DevOps initiatives. It's strategic.
It is. Okay, so this is where it gets really juicy. The podcast actually interviews a real-life DevOps engineer, someone who's in the trenches every day.
Yeah, and they don't sugarcoat it. They talk about the day-to-day grind, how they handle those, real-world challenges. It's super insightful.
I bet. I mean, it's one thing to understand the concepts, but hearing it from someone who's living it, that gives you a much more realistic picture.
Definitely. It's okay, this is what my day might actually look like.
Yeah. So let's talk about career advice. I know the podcast gives some solid tips. What were some of the key takeaways for you?
Definitely. The big three that stuck out to me were continuous learning, networking, and this is huge, getting practical experience.
Yeah, the learning never stops in this field, right?
Never. You got to be a lifelong learner. There are online courses, tutorials, open source projects to dive into. It's amazing the resources that are out there.
And networking. I mean, tech meetups, online communities.
Yeah. Find your tribe. It's about connecting with other people who are passionate about DevOps, sharing knowledge, learning from each other's experiences.
So true. And that practical experience, I mean, that's got to be key.
Absolutely. The podcast guest really hammered this home. Build your own projects, contribute to open source code, land an internship where you can apply all these skills you're learning.
So it's about actually doing the stuff, not just reading about it.
Exactly. That's what's going to make you stand out from the crowd. It's showing potential employers what you can actually do.
Makes total sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot. We talked about what DevOps is, the skills you need, the challenges, the advice from a seasoned pro. So if someone is listening right now thinking, all right, DevOps sounds cool, but how do I even get started? What would you say?
Honestly, I'd say take that podcast's advice to heart. Start by figuring out the right educational path for you, whether that's online courses, boot camps, or a more traditional degree. Build up a killer portfolio of projects that showcase your skills. And network, network, network. Connect with other DevOps folks, attend meetups, get your name out there.
I love that. Take action. Don't just dream it, be it.
Exactly. This deep dive has given you a solid foundation. Now it's up to you to build on it.
Go explore those online communities. Play around with coding languages. Get your hands dirty.
And, most importantly, don't be afraid to fail. You're going to learn so much more from your mistakes than you ever will from just reading a textbook.
So true. All right, folks, that's a wrap for today's deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with a thought. What part of the DevOps world really sparked your interest today? What are you most curious to learn more about? Let us know. And until next time, keep learning, keep building, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the world of DevOps.
See ya!